Well, what is it that makes the South spicy? Is it the food, the nightlife, or our man, the pride of Louisiana, who, when he is not sharing his brilliance on court TV, law and crime at every local news station, and lately with Nancy Grace on the radio and all over socials, he's running his own law firm, visiting churches all over the world, and of course, anchoring us right here. My spirit animal, the amazing Franz Borghardt, and joining us for the first time, the godfather in the world of news and true crime, the master of in-depth legal reporting and expert analysis. He's an attorney and an Emmy Award winner who has covered everything from OJ to Scott Peterson, the Menendez brothers, Cosby, Kevorkian, and countless more. The former anchor at CBS Chicago and absolutely killing it now, doing his own thing on Legal View. He is the great Michael Ayala. Gentlemen, Franz, Michael, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Truly appreciate it.
Let me say this for the record. Michael Ayala is one of my favorite legal minds on the planet. And I'm not just saying that. I would not have been able to sustain my time at court TV if it wasn't for Michael and Judge Ashley, who took me under their wings. So I do definitely, I'm glad to see Michael. Glad to see you doing awesome, man. So I'm excited about getting to spend some time with you.
I appreciate that, Franz. We've always enjoyed you. And that's why we gave you your own show on my show. We gave you your own show within my show. Fridays with Franz. You earned it, brother. You earned it.
But you know what, though? And you guys bring up a great point when people circling around and appearing on other people's stuff. And since whatever happened with court TV, like using social media, especially Facebook, Michael's out there doing his own thing. Personally, I think it's better. I know a lot of people, you read the comments and talk to a lot of people, a lot of it's better because, and you guys could talk about this. I mean, Joshua Schipper's told us this a million times. A lot of the restrictions when you're on network TV, a lot of you're starting to tell a story and you have 60 seconds or 90 seconds. There's people in your headset, there's directors and all this sort of thing where, again, Michael's putting up these videos on Facebook. And you're in your car, you're in your office, you hear that and the other thing, and it's fantastic. So do you feel a little bit more of like a little more freedom to be able to talk to what you talk about, or do you kind of miss the structured setup?
It's interesting how much time you got. It's been interesting. I absolutely enjoy it. Anybody ask me how things have been going, I say it's been liberating. It's absolutely been liberating. The opportunity to not be constrained by time. And that was really the biggest constraint. I didn't find at Court TV, one of the things I enjoyed about it was there wasn't any real editorial restraint in terms of what we were going to say, what we wanted to say. We had that freedom. You just didn't have enough time to say the things you wanted to say, give it the full context. Doing things on this, these other platforms, and I sort of my base is Substack, and then I sort of flow out from there, and I do a lot of writing. I've gotten back to that. That was something I did very early on in my career. But what I found, um, so when I first got out on my own, tremendous support from all of my old court TV folks. And I'm talking about viewers, oh, great to have you back. We're wondering where you're going to land, blah, blah, blah. Brothers, the minute I started talking about something they didn't like, and specifically about the Carmelo Anthony case, where I started talking about some of my own life experiences that had to do with race and all these other things. You want to talk about how fast these people just deserted me? I mean, they deserted me, disappeared, had no interest at all. And suddenly I was this biased guy. Oh, we used to love you on court TV because you were unbiased, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm still unbiased. I'm just telling my truth now. So it's been an interesting experience and one that I thoroughly enjoy, absolutely.
Well, and again, like from somebody like me, like you have a million places to pick and follow different people and all that sort of thing. But that's the kind of thing that I want. Again, you see some of this, again, news, especially when it comes to true crime and stuff like that. They'll just, everything just kind of blows around in a 5 or 10 minute segment where everybody kind of repeats the same thing. Like you just said, you've heard about this Carmelo Anthony thing a million times. Nobody actually tells you what they think about it. They're just saying, "Oh, a young white kid that was the same age stabbed somebody and got 10 years. Carmelo did the exact same thing. He's black. He got 35 years." But nobody tells you what they think about it.
I think the podcast world allows you to go. So Michael is sitting at the host desk, basically hosting court in real time. That's one thing, right? And he may have a conversation on that platform with a legal analyst about what's going on. Like we're watching a football game and, hey, that was a good pass. That wasn't a good pass, and this, that, and the other. But there's not an opportunity to talk about socioeconomics. There's not an opportunity to talk about disparities between different treatment of one defendant versus another, and economics and all that stuff. The podcast world allows that. And it's awesome because it allows that. It also allows, unfortunately, not in Michael's case, but what the podcast world also allows is anybody to plug a microphone into a recording mechanism and put stuff out there.
Thank
And
God
you have
for
different,
that.
you have different.
It's
Derek's
not like
great.
you're sitting in your basement with your New York Jets and your New York Washington Reds. Before you go on, the Jets, what's that about? Are you a Jet fan?
I grew up, yeah. Vinny Testaverde was like the first.
Okay, because I'm a Jet fan, lifelong Jet fan.
Well, Michael, do you remember back in our day before Sunday Ticket and all that sort of thing, you had like regional blackouts? So because I lived closest to Buffalo, no matter what was on, you'd always have a Bills game. But until you got an off week or the Bills were playing in prime time or whatever, that was the only. So like, I was so fucking sick of Jim Kelly at that time. I turned it on one time, and Testaverde was playing for the Jets, and I was like, "Wait a second, this is nice to see somebody play other, even though you're stuck in the division with the fucking Patriots."
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
what I did want to also,
it's been an awful ride being a Jets fan. But
and they got Geno Smith back, so the awful ride is going to continue.
Dude, I don't even want to begin on that. But we're trending in the right direction. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, for the last 25 years.
What I also wanted to say, and I forgot to say this, but I do.
I saw the Jets helmet, man, and I was like, I got to bring it up.
Squirrel. So one of the things that we could not talk about, or we were discouraged from talking about on court TV, was politics. And sometimes in a case, and sometimes in a case, there's no good way about saying this. Politics come into the courtroom. The politics of a certain jurisdiction. Race was I never felt like race was off limits. But again, there's not a big opportunity to talk about that. The other side is what was very interesting is seldom did I know the makeup of a jury. I didn't know gender, I didn't know race and all that. And that's sometimes a big part of the conversation is who's sitting over there listening. So I like Michael Unplugged. Obviously, I liked Michael on Court TV.
It's fantastic.
But yeah. I like Michael Unplugged because it's a different level of I'll use the word intimacy. It's a different level of intimacy that you can expound on. Yeah.
So sorry, I want to hear Michael's thoughts on this for Franz. I just want to go back for a second because when you brought up what we were talking shortly about Carmelo Anthony, if you could put on your former prosecutor hat, when you got to work in the morning, and like we've talked before, you'd have your cases or whatever you had to work on that day. When you saw that, I mean, I know you're not racist. We've talked about this a million times, but
I don't think I'm racist. I got lots of black friends.
How do we know that? How do we know that?
I said I'm pretty sure, just in case he has a meltdown. Then I could say I was right. I said pretty sure, not 100%. But when you open up that file and you see, okay, it's a homicide, it's a stabbing, the kid is 16 or whatever he was, like in the back of your head, you're thinking, well, unless you're in Louisiana, it's life, but you're just thinking, okay, this is a 12-year or a 15-year. Like you saw this stuff all the time. That's why it's confusing to have such a gap. Like if it was a 20-year or a 22-year, an 18-year sentence where there's only a few-year gap, that makes a little bit more sense. I don't understand from a prosecution angle how that didn't kind of get flagged.
So I'm going to give you a short answer to a very complicated question. One, you're making certain assumptions. As a felony prosecutor, was the decision made for me, and was I just given marching orders, or was I giving an autonomy to make a decision on that? Sometimes the reality is sometimes it's not Nuremberg, right? It's not I was following orders, but sometimes your boss tells you this is what I'd like to see done with this prosecution. That's number one. Am I trying someone as an adult or as a juvenile? Because that matters. I have a problem. This is not a popular opinion as from a prosecutorial standpoint. I have a problem prosecuting someone who's super young and a juvenile as an adult. Because yes, you heighten the penalties, but we know that they're not fully developed. We know that they're not fully cooked. And so what are you doing? Why are you trying to put someone who's not fully cooked and developed away for decades? What is that going to do? So to some degree, these are things that would come into my mind. I will tell you though, when it comes to high profile cases, and again, Louisiana's different because Louisiana doesn't have cameras in the courtrooms. We have high profile cases, but it's not the same level of high profile. I think cameras in courtrooms is a good thing, not just as a legal commentator do I say that, but I think high profile, you start taking the decision making authority out of the line felony prosecutor, and that decision is made for them. And I think that that kind of a case, though, my problem with it is, are we doing the system justice by making someone do that much time when, I mean, candidly, how old was he when the crime happened?
17.
17. Technically an adult in Louisiana, but look, we're all going to agree a 17-year-old is not fully it's not fully developed, not fully cooked. And in fact, that's one of the reasons the United States Supreme Court has said we can't put someone under a certain age to death, because they're not fully developed, they're not fully cooked. And I'm using the word fully developed, fully cooked. They're not developmentally where they're going to be when they come to a certain age. So it's a tough gig. It's a tough gig because of those factors I just told you. But then there's other cases where I had complete autonomy and I could do whatever I thought was fair as long as I could explain why I was doing what I was doing. I will lastly say dealing with victims is the hardest part of the job, because sometimes the victims are the ones driving the where you're going with the case, although they're not supposed to be. But sometimes the difficult part with victims was explaining to a victim, okay, I know you want me to put this individual to death, but I can't do that. One, it's not an appropriate case for that. And this is why I'm thinking we need to resolve this case the way we are.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would be shocked, and probably not, you wouldn't be shocked because you're out here and you're doing these things, how along racial lines this case felt. White folks felt generally that this guy was a monster, needed to be away the rest of his life. There was no consideration at all
Right.
about what you're talking about. Black folks said, no, there's some humanity there. And we could see this guy. And one of the points I made throughout was, I think we looked at him like a 17-year-old boy. I have a 17 or a 16-year-old son, and I know that situation. I think we've all been in that situation when you're confronted with something with another kid. This was not one of those kind of cases where you can say, I want to dump this guy in jail for the rest of his life, no matter what age he is. It wasn't that kind of case at all. But that was the case that the prosecution painted. And that's where I said, and I had a problem with the way that race played into this case, because I think it's easier for an all-white jury. I know there were 2 Asians and 2 East Indians, but at the end of the day, I think it's easier for a jury with no Black people on it to accept that this young kid at 17 is a monster and left the house that day with the idea of murdering someone, which I will never buy, never in a million years buy. Whether he had the knife in, I don't know what it was there for. 2 things happened. He didn't take the stand, and they chose a jury. And when you put the factor of a jury in, then it becomes totally unpredictable. So that's where I think a lot of the 35 years came in. I'm convinced if he took the stand, told a story that made sense, which I think clearly there was a story here that made sense, and you didn't have a jury making that decision, or even if you did, I think that the years would have come down. But when you're talking about Texas, 5 to 99 years, boy, that's a big stretch, the way they sort of structured that murder statute.
This might be an entry level question for both of you, but Anthony's defense was part of picking that jury. Wouldn't you have, whether you wanted to admit it or not, purposely tried to make it at least half white and half Black? Or do you not have that on? Sometimes.
Well, it depends on. Okay, so in theory, that sounds great. So, and Michael, I want you to expound on this too. One, you don't get to pick who's on the panels, so it's randomly drawn. If there's a racial disparity of, hey, where's all the Black folk? Well, then you can file a motion, a constitutional challenge to a jury of peers and all that. But you don't always get to pick who's on the panels. Also, something I will point out is on the individual panels, whether it's 12 people, 14 people, and you're doing voir dire, yes, you would want someone that looks like your client possibly on the jury, but sometimes potential jurors deselect themselves. I had, as a public defender, I represented African American individuals, and I thought, hey, I need to get some black jurors on there that will be sympathetic. And they convicted my client just as quickly as the white folks
Mm-hmm.
did. The other interesting piece is it's not just race, it's also where are we trying the case? Is it a conservative jurisdiction where the jury, there's just a lot of other factors. Now, that said, I would have paid money to see that jury selection because, like many people, Michael, I was like, wait, like all white jury? Like what happened there? Because I don't know what happened.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I honestly I feel like there were a lot of deficiencies in this defense, and I don't know why. If I had to guess, this is an attorney. I got the sense from this area that there was a lot of pressure. I felt some of the testimony by the teens was as a result of pressure in the community, the way they testified, et cetera. I thought maybe the attorney said, look, I've got to live and work in this community. I'm going to defend this kid, but I'm not going to go bend over my back,
Interesting.
over backwards to defend this kid. But let me say this about jury selection. It's about 10% Black in Frisco, Texas. It's a conservative community, a Republican stronghold. A lot of the questions that were asked in voir dire by the defense involved, what are your feelings on immigration? What are your feelings about certain issues that will give you a sense, to Franz's point, about whether they have a conservative view of life or non-conservative view of life. But there's another thing to factor in, and it's something that a couple of attorney friends of mine have talked about, and we've talked about, is what Black jurors have done often. And there were reports that a couple of Black jurors in this case, and there weren't many in the panel, begged off. And they gave answers to questions that they knew would get them off the jury. Now, I'm not going to vilify them for doing that. And I wrote this in one of my articles because people may have all kinds of reasons for not wanting to serve on a jury. They don't want it. It's a controversial, high profile case. They may have people they're taking care of at home. They may have jobs that they can't miss time for. But there were a couple of people who begged off. And then you had the prosecutor, three of the final Black jurors allowed in that last panel. They got rid of them because they were school teachers, and the Batson challenge did not go over well with the judge. So I'm not saying that the defense didn't try, because oftentimes you are trying, but it just doesn't work out for various reasons. And those are some of the reasons why it won't work out.
So one of the ways and I'm speaking for Louisiana, because I haven't tried anything in Texas, what we have observed is African American potential jurors will sometimes use the phrase, I can't sit in judgment. It's against my religion to sit in judgment of another human being. And we will try to rehabilitate them, Derek, which is to say, well, look, you understand you're not sitting in judgment of my client. You're sitting
You just
in judgment
have
of whether.
to, point one way or the other.
Yeah. And there is, and it's not, now look, I will say this. I think white, black, yellow, whatever color you want, I think it becomes obvious when someone doesn't want to serve versus they have a truly sincere, I'm the victim of a crime. This is that crime. I don't think I can be fair to your client. That's different, right? But we've observed that the two getting off the panel, so to speak, is I can't sit in judgment. It's against my religion. I can't sit in judgment of someone. Or, and this is a valid one, I'm afraid about repercussions to myself in my community for sitting and serving on this jury, which is depending on where you live. So I will say, Michael, though, that I think if this young man has a shot at another bite at the apple, which is an appellate court coming back down, is I think that there were things that happened that might be arguably ineffective assistance. I think, Batson, he referenced Batson, for example. One of the ways that we sometimes see cases overturned is someone makes an objection of, hey, you're getting rid of this minority and you didn't do that right, and you don't have race neutral reasons and all that. If the court rules against you on that objection, sometimes that's the reason for a remand. But we see that typically in death penalty cases, not as much in other non-death penalty. So they're like you. I think that the defense, maybe that was why they didn't put up the way I thought they could have put up and defend him. But I think that the deficiencies in the defense, and Josh Schiffer and I talked about this, the deficiencies of the defense were kind of glaring.
Absolutely.
And look, last thing, it's easy to be an armchair quarterback and look at someone else's work and say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? Trials
Especially when it's over, yeah.
Yeah, trials are organic things, and in real time, stuff comes up, and you're like making split decisions and all that. I absolutely, in this case, I think he needed to testify. Now, he may have been the one to say, I don't want to testify. I'm nervous. I'm scared. But I think if he gets up and testifies and tells his story about why it was that he did what he did, I mean, I don't know that he's acquitted necessarily, but I definitely could see someone saying, hung jury.
Well, do you know what though?
Go ahead, man.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say a good question for both of you. So let's say the ineffective defense works. They re-up this whole thing and they get another bite at the apple. At the end of it, he ends up with 30 years. Do we kind of have to sit back after that? If they've got the jury that they want, if everything kind of falls into place like we're saying what they should have done, assuming that happens on the second swing, and he gets 30 years, do we sit back afterwards and go, shit, maybe we were wrong? Or that's just the way things happen in Texas?
So generally, you don't get more time for the second bite at the apple. There's a constitutional argument for you can't be punished for using your rights to appeal, and by giving more time, you would theoretically be punished. So some states, I don't know if Texas is one of those, you don't get more time. And generally, what you might do is you might negotiate. I don't know what the negotiations in this case were. So I don't know if there were negotiations and they couldn't come to some kind, because this felt like, to me, this felt like a negotiable, like, let's resolve it with a plea or something.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Nobody goes in at 35 and in at 5 and don't meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but because this was a 5 to 99.
Sorry, 5 to 99, yeah.
Yeah, 5 to 99. And if you think about it, they fell somewhere in the middle there, right? It's not too far from the middle. But I think part of the problem, and I agree 100% with Franz, in that I felt there was a lot this defense could have done that they didn't do, but it's hard to armchair quarterback because you don't know what. I really feel, and just from some of the people I talked to on the ground out there, some of the court TV reporters were out there, that there was a lot of pressure in that community to the people in terms of who they testified for. What we saw was something amazing. When Kevin Parra, who was his friend, the one that called him over to the tent, testified, he completely and utterly turned on his friend. He was caught basically lying about how much he knew the kid. He gets up there and says, I barely knew him. I just came across him a couple of times. It was on cross that the defense came up with a bunch of pictures over the last few weeks of them together on the weekends hanging out. You know what I mean? And there were all kinds of pictures of Kevin Parra hanging out. He was part of the memorial team with Kevin with Metcalf. And there were all kinds of pictures of them at houses, at pool parties. And I think there was pressure in the community on these kids. There were pressures in this community on these lawyers that, you needed to take the right position in this case if you want to live in this community. And this kind of thing happens. Ron spoke to it. Even jurors feel that pressure in high-profile cases. And I would almost guarantee that this was the kind of case that the plea discussions weren't very favorable to the defense, because I'm sure they would have taken something that was favorable. And I've seen this case many, many times. This is not something that's odd. This happens more than you could even imagine. And I've seen black juries in New York put this kid away for 15 years, 10 years, 8 years. I've seen white juries put white kids away for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years for this type of situation. But the problem here, I think, is that there was never an opportunity for him, again, as Franz said, to tell his story. And I do not understand why. There is nothing he could have said on that stand. Based on what we've learned about this young man, he was a good young man, didn't have a criminal background, worked 2 jobs, was a good student, captain of 2 teams. You're not a knucklehead if you're a captain of 2 teams.
No, because you'd have no
Track
free
and
time. You
football.
wouldn't have time to get into trouble.
But coaches know knuckleheads, and they're not going to put you in a position to captain a team if you're a knucklehead.
Agreed.
So I'm going in with the assumption he's
Especially in
not a
Texas.
knucklehead.
They take that shit
Especially in
seriously
Texas.
down there.
And
I
here's
think
part you guys don't know. One last thing, Franz. My friend has 4 sons who play football and run track in Texas, and they're in Frisco all the time. And they didn't know that family, but he sort of verified a lot of things that we all know just from playing sports. You know, the types of kids these kids are, the types of situations that arise, this whole tent culture thing, which was a lot of baloney. And so all those things were being verified, but we heard nothing of that, right? We didn't hear a lot of it. And I just felt like either the defense didn't do their job and go out and find the right people to talk to, or they did, and those people just didn't want to take the stand and be a part of defending in any way Carmelo Anthony.
So the thing on social media, which I don't like using social media as the 13th juror, but comments about what people are like, what about this, what about this, what about this, sometimes gives you insight of what potential jurors are thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I think him testifying, I think he needed to explain, okay, well, why did you have a knife? Perfectly able to have a knife, but why did you have a knife? And I think if he explains that, because there was definitely, at least on social media, there was an attempt to make him into a thug. And it was like watching a square peg try to get fit into a round hole.
It was always bad. It was bad pictures. He was always had a. You never saw a picture of him smiling.
And I
2
think
things. Let me just jump in real quick. Let me just jump
please
in
do,
because this is important. This is very important. You're exactly right. And when I tried to explain to people why a white jury was important, it's because it was so much easier for them, not having any reference point in the Black community with a kid like Carmelo, to accept the argument that he was a thug and left his house that day with intentions to kill. Where is the evidence of that? There was nothing in his life that would suggest that that was the case. So I am starting from a point of that was not the case. So I want to hear why he had the knife, and I agree that was a big, big problem. But here's the second part of that scenario. When you heard the testimony of the teens on the stand, they didn't say these words. They were asked with leading questions, which were not objected to. They were asked, was Carmelo Anthony the sole aggressor? Yes. Was he trying to pick a fight, or what was it? What's the word they used? Was he provoking a fight? Yes. Each one answered that way, never objected to. So no one ever talked about the posture, the actions of the white kids. Why wouldn't anybody questioning the fact that out of the blue, they just show up? He's sitting there. He's not ever standing up. He's not causing any problems. He's talking shit, but anybody can talk shit, right? That's 17. Not reason to. He's 17. That was something I kept saying. That's what 17-year-old boys do. And 17-year-old boys are obstinate. You tell them to leave, they're going to tell you I ain't going nowhere, right? They feel like they don't have to leave. It's just what happens.
Do you remember how much we knew at 17? Do you know how much shit we
Absolutely. That's my point. But nobody ever questioned the actions of these guys. Why are they so adamant that they're the ones that they're going to make him leave? And then at some point, he's telling you, don't touch me, and you still feel like it's okay for you to touch him. And no one says that that's not an aggressive, provocative action, that he was the sole aggressor. All you do is watch the video and watch these 4 boys walk up and walk right up to him and surround him. To me, that's an aggressive posture. And I'm immediately, if I'm him, I'm thinking I'm getting into a defensive posture. I'm saying, okay, where's my exit? You know, who did I hit first? I mean, that's how you start thinking. So that was part of the narrative of this case that really bothered me and I felt was driven by race.
Sorry, just another quick entry-level question for you guys. it seems obviously that the trial of this is the bigger issue, just with things being brought up and all that. Now, if it's an issue for the potential jurors, the lawyers, and obviously the people involved, can't they move this trial somewhere else?
Mm.
You could try to. So there are, and again, I don't know the record, so I don't know if they have ever filed a motion to change venue or.
Exactly. I
But
don't know.
but remember something, Derek. Jurisdictions fight to keep their cases in their jurisdiction unless it is impossible to try the case. Why? Because that's their community. It's a public matter. It's a public trial. The crime happened there.
You want to show people we deal with our shit here rather than pass it off
well,
to the neighbor.
well, yeah, and to some degree, to some degree, there are a few cases where I want to leave the jurisdiction if I have a viable defense of you're from here, you understand. Again, I think he has to get on the stand and say, I think these guys were about to beat the shit out of me. There was four of them.
That is a no-brainer. At least, even if they can't prove it was self-defense, you put that out there and people can
fight a good fight with my fist.
Yeah, my point all along, guys. My point all along was this was a manslaughter case. This was not a murder case. This was not an intentional murder. He did not intend that. And I thought this was a manslaughter case. It was a reckless action because once you put your hand in your bag and you say, touch me and find out, you're aware that something you have in your bag can defend you or cause harm. But then at that point, once they start pushing and shoving, it becomes sort of this reckless behavior that ends up in death. And that's where I think this case lands if you have the right approach as a defense.
So inside baseball, you have a homicide case and you think it might be a manslaughter. You have a decision to make as a prosecutor. Do I seek an indictment for a higher crime and use the lesser charge as my plea stopping point? Or do I indict for what I think it is? And the drawback of that is every defense attorney wants to get a perceived deal. Okay. Some clients are like, man, I was at second-degree murder and you're letting me plead to manslaughter and that's a deal. And this, there's something to be said about that. The problem with indicting higher is you have to have victim management because victims don't understand, wait a minute, this was a higher murder and you're letting him plead to what? So the drawback is if you don't have, and I say management, I'm not saying control, but management in the sense of I had to have several conversations with victims when I was seeking an indictment for a murder case. Well, why aren't we doing the death penalty? And I'd say, well, look, frankly, under the law, your case doesn't have the necessary aggravating factors to seek the death penalty. And then number two, I would have the conversation, Derek. I would say, hey, look, Louisiana's a life state. Which do you think is a bigger punishment? Him rotting every day for the rest of his life for 30, 40 years, or him being put to death like that and it being over? And they're like, well, we kind of want him to rot. And I said, well, then you don't want the death penalty, right? And they're like, yeah, we didn't think about it that way. So there is a nuance to how you get the indictment. I absolutely agree with Michael. I thought this was overcharged, and I don't know if it was they thought it was that and they were going for that and that's what they were pursuing, or
it was just a bad it just sounds like it was a terrible negotiation and a half-assed defense. I can't imagine. And like, again, it just, like you've seen some of these, whether it's Texas or not, you've seen, not anything outside of first-degree murder end with 8 years, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know. It just seems fishy.
Factor in the fact that he has no criminal background. Now, I in part of my article I wrote another article about the fact that, quite frankly, people with his background, judicial sentencing, because again, Texas is one of only 6 states that has jury sentencing and non-capital opportunities for non-capital cases. He was about in the average, somewhere between 25 and 40 years is where someone like him would have fell on that sort of judicial thing. So
You're like,
he
you
kind
were
of
too rough on
fell,
him. No, that was average.
this
So
kind of was in the average of where he belonged. So
That's wild.
that's interesting. One last
Wild.
thing. Um, when we talk about this particular case, I don't have a problem, Franz, with prosecutors charging murder in this case. I think there were questions, legitimate questions, about what his intentions were. But I wanted to ask you, as a prosecutor, I don't know, especially in Frisco, Texas, maybe places in Louisiana, is there a prosecutor who wanted to keep his job and move up in his office who would have charged this as a manslaughter? Honestly, there are those pressures too, are there not? Where you can't be seen as a guy who's going to take it easy, especially in a case like this one.
so I'm going to preface this with I live in a state where we just indicted our attorney general for public intimidation and malfeasance. Grand jury work. There are times I would go into the grand jury thinking it was something, and I would tell them, this is what I think it is. And this is why I think it is what it is. And it really was an indicting a ham sandwich situation. There were times where I looked at them and I said, I don't know what this is. It could be this, it could be this, and it could be this. And you need to be the one to decide. And maybe I'm a unicorn here. On one of them, they wanted to go higher than what I thought. And I said, it is your prerogative to do that. I cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that charge. And so if you indict that high, I will tell you, if I have to try it with that charge, it will likely not be a conviction, or I will resolve it at lower. That said, that is why I said at the beginning of this conversation, I don't know which prosecutor in that office handled this case. I don't know if it was a higher up. This is a high profile case, so I would expect a higher up prosecutor, a seasoned prosecutor to handle it. I don't know how much autonomy that district attorney gave that prosecutor to do anything other than what we saw. It is an elected position. It is better for them to try it and lose it and say, hey, we don't agree with the jury, but we did what we could. Justice is served. We're moving on to the next case. That is more acceptable to society than I charged him with a lower charge because I think that that's fair and I'm reasonable. And by the way, I'm running for reelection in a couple of years.
Yeah, and you can always use that, Franz, and say, look, I charged him with murder, even if in your mind's eye, in your heart of hearts, you don't believe it's a murder case. You charge it as a murder, and you say to yourself, let justice play out. Let the chips fall where they may. If, in fact, the evidence is only manslaughter, they'll have the lesser included, and we'll get the manslaughter. But I can always say in my campaign, I charged him with murder, and that dumb old jury didn't quite see it that way.
You know what? Michael sort of brought up a great point earlier with that whole defense point, because again, we're talking about stupid 17-year-old kids. I want to move off of this in a bit, but I just want to say, like, there wasn't no premeditation. This time with all the social media, he wasn't posting. People always say, oh, we saw this ahead of time. There was his letters at home, his behavior, and all that sort of thing. There was none of that in this case. Not that I saw, anyways. It just says, like, it's something like this. It doesn't happen out of the blue. It just doesn't. Again, every time that you see a younger person in one of these cases, there was always something that some sort of sign.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's something that really still eats away to me to this day. Like, what? I don't believe for a second this kid woke up that morning, put that little 3-inch knife in his bag because he was going to go look for a fight so he could stab somebody. You could not, you will never convince me of that. But I wonder why he responded the way he did under those circumstances. It could be something as simple as maybe he was bullied before, right? Some kids decide one day, and I did when I was young, I was bullied as a younger kid. And then they really, literally around 13, 14 years old, I realized that I could no longer keep going outside where I lived and allow that to happen to me. I just wouldn't survive. and I just made a decision, and suddenly the littlest thing, I'm punching somebody in the face. You know what I mean? Because
So
you just
New
have to
York, fuck
change
around
the
and find
narrative,
out.
right? And
Michael
thankfully, I
coming.
never carried weapons, so who knows if I'd have had a weapon, maybe I'd have done something stupid. But again, you got to factor in this whole idea. Franz, let me ask you a quick question, and I know you want to say something. You say something, but answer my question after. Um, I wondered, and I talked to a lot of people about this, why there wasn't anything brought in regarding this, the youthful mind and all those things, not fully formed prefrontal cortex.
I
I
I think
wondered
that
all about that.
that's the malpractice right
Well,
there,
well,
I think.
here's what people told me, and I want to get your opinion. They said if you're claiming self-defense, that could be almost self-defeating. Because if you bring an expert in to start talking about the idea that this was about some sort of impulsive reaction of an underdeveloped mind, they can then twist that to be, well, so you're not saying it was self-defense, you're saying this was some impulsive action. And then they can argue to the jury at the end and say, this wasn't self-defense. He knew what he was doing. It may have been impulsive, but he knew what he was doing.
Your plan A and plan B in a jurisdiction where you have a jury making a decision on sentencing. You've got the problem that you have to pivot immediately after claiming, hey, he's not guilty, he's innocent. You've got to pivot immediately into this is why you should give him less time. And by the way, he cannot accept responsibility in sentencing because he has all these appeal rights. And if he gets up there and says, yeah, I'm responsible for this and I'm sorry, then that could be used. I'm telling you, that's difficulty number one. Number two is if you don't have that expert testify at some point in the trial, especially in the penalty phase, I would have had him in the guilt phase because I hear the argument for self-defeating self-defense. But the problem is I would argue that in a self-defense, I guess, environment or matrix, it's what he experiences, his reasonable belief, his reasonable observations based on who he is. That includes his lack of development. That includes what is he experienced. And I just, if you're not going to put it on in your case in chief for guilt phase, okay, but you've got to have that in sentencing. But I think that
I mean,
by putting it on, and Derek, let me say this. If you have it in the guilt phase, they've heard it in the guilt phase, so they already heard it and they can consider it in the sentencing phase. Mm-hmm. That all said, I think what's interesting to me, and Derek's from Canada, so that's like a different, that's a different universe.
Oh, if he had done that up here, he'd be out in 3 years.
so we have guys, we have white guys.
If he did 3 years.
I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. People carry pocket knives. Kids carry pocket knives. My son is 10 years old. His uncle gave him a Swiss Army knife that we are very watchful about him on. But like, people carry knives in the South. That's a thing, right? And just because you have a knife, and it may be, I think the other thing for me, which I struggled with, is I would have made it yes, this is a dangerous weapon, but it's also a utility. And that may not have made a difference, but I mean, in the context of he's a black male, you're making him into a thug. Well, no, just because you have a knife doesn't mean you're a thug. It's a utility device.
Two things. They brought it out on cross when they were, because one of the issues here was this a weapon under the law, which then would have totally, the self-defense would have gone out the window. Well, it only had a 3-inch blade. The law said it's a weapon if it has a 5-inch blade, so it wasn't a weapon. And they brought that out on cross of one of the officers. So there's that. But the other thing that I would have brought out that they didn't bring out was, if he was so dead set upon doing something, why was it in his bag and not in his pocket? Why wasn't it in the front thing of his pocket or the pocket of his sweatpants if he's going there with the idea that I'm going to find somebody to use this on, right? It was in his bag. And it just makes me think that it was either in there for some other reason and got left in there, or maybe he put it in there, who knows, to clean his cleats out on a rainy day. Who knows? Again, it was a big problem that he didn't get up and tell the jury why he had it in. But the last thing that I'm going to consider, based on the totality of the circumstances, who this kid is his background, the situation, where the knife was, that it was in there because he was getting ready to murder somebody that day.
If this was a death penalty case, Derek, the not having an expert witness to talk about
Would
development
absolutely,
would absolutely
certainly
eviscerated a sentence of death, if not gotten him a new
Mhm.
bite at the apple. I don't know that it does it in this case, but if you want to know my feeling on what was the ineffective assistance of counsel, it's that expert. And I will say again, I'm from a place where, and this is the hard thing doing commentary for cases around the country, courts that immediately shift into sentencing after a trial, I want time to put on a presentation in sentencing.
Mhm.
I think you need a slight delay in that. I get that delay because Louisiana does that. And the judge decides sentencing, not the jury. But I've always said the hardest part about losing a trial and then facing sentencing is that pivot to where my client cannot stand up and accept responsibility because he cannot get up and accept responsibility. I've
Mhm.
had trials that I've lost or I've gotten responsive verdicts on where my client has maintained his innocence from day one and continues to maintain his innocence. So if he gets up and allocutes and says, I didn't do this, so I don't think you should sentence me, the judge is going to come down harder on him. So I
Mhm.
have to stand up and say, Judge, I know that the victim's family and the court wants some kind of acceptance responsibility, but because of my client's appellate rights, I am on his behalf saying he can't do that. And he is remaining silent, not because he doesn't want to say something, but if he does, anything he says can be used against him. And you know, and most good judges understand that, but not everybody.
But
And
it's also a terrible finish. If you put on, you know, a
well,
really good defense
yeah.
and all that, and then at the end of it you have 15 minutes of bunk, everyone's going to be looking
No,
over going like, what the fuck is he talking about? Yeah.
it was awful, Derek. All he did was he put on the mother. This is a kid who, by all accounts, again, had two jobs, captain of two teams, and all he could put on was the mother.
I
It didn't make any sense to me
let
that that
let me
was all
say
he could
this.
put on in the sentencing phase. So
That
when you
kid,
start looking at it that way, and the other thing that really bothered me was in opening statements. When I read his opening statement, because again, big problem. I agree with you, Franz, not having cameras in the courtroom in a case like this. And his explanations made no sense. And then, the judge did an interview like the day after the trial to tell everybody what a great job he did. But the, the, and that's exactly what he did. All my rulings were right. All my rulings were according to the law. You'll
As soon as
see.
they ask you a question, you
And
just keep saying, "Well, listen, man, I
yeah,
did great." So it
well,
was
of
up to
course he's
them.
going to
that's
say that,
exactly what
right?
he said. That's
Of course
exactly what
he's
he
going to
said.
say that.
Yeah, and the unfortunately the reporter didn't have any idea what questions to ask him, so he didn't know how to sort of work around that crap. But the defense attorney, his argument in opening statements was merely this: in this kind of case, was you're going to find that the prosecutors are not going to be able to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that this was intentional murder. That was his argument. In a case like this, that was his argument. What
Derek,
when I heard that opening statement, I said, "This guy's not really falling. He's not fully in on this case at all."
so
Well, no, it
so
sounds
tw-
like even in the last 45 minutes, you guys have poked out a dozen holes. Like again, if
so
you look at it from any other angle, you think this wasn't just a poor defense. This was just terrible, not by the book.
I I will say this. I've done this for about 20 years. And this is a tough case to try because I think inside as a defense attorney, you are genuinely you're worried about all your clients. But this is self-defense ones are hard because people always ask, well, how do you represent people who are guilty? I'm telling people all the time. It's the people I think that are innocent are the ones that I lose sleep over. The ones that are guilty, I'll do what I can. I've dreamt
Hmm.
though. This is my last point on this case. I've dreamt about having clients like this where they can testify.
Hmm.
And he has so much good stuff that you can get out and totally change the landscape of who he is by just having him talk about where he's from, what he does, all the things, all the positive things in the world. He has entire life in front of him. This is the last thing somebody like him would want to
Hmm.
do
But
to
but
ruin
see,
his
Hmm.
life.
that helps on all the other one. Like Michael was saying earlier, with his friends getting up there answering all the loaded questions and stuff. If you get this kid up there for 5 or 10 minutes, all those other answers have to change because you can't say I barely know this, that, and the other thing.
Well,
It
but he
changes.
can
It changes the
also
whole rhythm of the game.
but he can also testify to these people are my friends. I
Yeah.
don't know why all of a sudden and by the way, that sincerity,
Hmm.
might move a juror to say, you know what, we don't think it's this, we think it's this,
Yeah.
or I just I,
Well, just it reminds them that he's a boy.
Yeah.
He's a boy. You know, that the prosecution went bent over backwards to paint him as this monster. As I said, who left the house that day with intentions to kill and went to the tent that day with intentions to kill, which is completely opposite of what we heard, was that he was called over by this guy, Kevin Parra. But apparently he went over there to kill somebody. This is what the prosecutor said. And, you know, you get up there and just hearing him talk, I think would have been more than enough for you to say, man,
Yeah.
this is just a boy. This is a boy, you know?
Sorry,
Uh,
I just wanted to throw something out there, just because I know that Michael's been on it lately, and I know it's one of Franz's favorite topics is when it comes to internet privacy or expected privacy,
mm,
especially now in the world of AI.
hmm.
Because again, it's like the next level. Like Franz has told some amazing stories, and Josh has told amazing stories about like guys, admitting to a murder on a prison phone several
Mm.
different times. This isn't an isolated incident, but now I'm
I
guessing that there's an expected privacy with AI because if anyone, it's difficult to explain how good it is, AI in general, because like it always
I
gets painted as the
agree.
bad thing. Like if I want to drive down and see friends in Louisiana and I want to have the best Philly cheesesteak here and I want to save money on gas and I want to stuff here and all this, people don't understand. You can type in there, I want to go to Franz and I want to do blah 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 blah. It's going to tell you. Now, as soon as you get something that's not good with that, people are going to obviously try to use it for bad shit. Like, I've used it for gambling, but it's only a matter of time before I commented on Michael's post the other day when he was talking about it. He says, "Where's the best way to get rid of a body in southern Indiana and all that?" So,
Hmm.
Michael, maybe you want to kick us off and tell us that whatever you put in Google, the police are probably going to find it.
Yeah, actually, that it all depends. It all depends. So the Supreme Court just handed down a ruling that sort of changed the game a little bit because there had been this rule, the third party rule, right? The idea was when you give information to AI and it's going to a third party like OpenAI or to Google, the presumption is that you're giving it to a third party, so you have no expectation of privacy to that. And that included your location data, your GPS, all those things that are on the phone. Now, what the court ruled was that that's not the case anymore. When you have that kind of data on your phone, you have an expectation of privacy. So these dragnet warrants where they can say, and it was really an amazing case that they ruled on. It was a guy who robbed a bank in Richmond, Virginia. They had no leads at all. So what they did was they went to Google and asked for all the phones in that area 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after. They got those numbers. There are about 25 or 20 numbers, and they narrowed it down and they caught the guy. Amazing Minority Report type stuff right at the end of the day. But the court said no, that, as much as, we're all about law and order and we want to be safe, there's lines. The Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure is there for a reason, and this violates that. So from that aspect, I believe that was the right decision, right? But here's the interesting thing about the case. It was actually moot. The court didn't even have to really rule on it because Google doesn't even keep that information anymore. They've now, because of all the requests, leave that on your phone and do not take that information. So it becomes an interesting question as to exactly how far they're going to go with it. Gorsuch wanted to call it a property right in his concurring opinion. But at the end of the day, I think it was a move in the right direction because I believe even though we signed these agreements, we basically sign away our lives. You have no idea what's in those 50-page agreements when we agree and we're just moving forward, what we're giving away. But I believe that I have an expectation of privacy with those types of things.
Well, also, Michael,
so
can't that work against you in the other direction? So let's say I'm pissed off and I say, "Oh, how can I, sneak into somebody's house and beat them or whatever like that?" And then that actually
Mhm.
happens. Assuming my information is out there and available and they do a search like you just said, they say, geez, Derek on his phone said, what's the easiest way to break into a second floor window and beat somebody? And then that actually
Mhm.
happens. Wouldn't my information being leaked out if I'm a law abiding citizen be a good thing?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's just like any other crime. If they have probable cause, yes, they should get your phone, they should get your computer, and they should check it out. They should not have the
Search warrant.
ability to just go blanketly and say, well, I'm going to check all the computers of all the people within a certain radius of this house because we believe the person lived in the area. That's what usually happens in
So
these cases. And we're going to start looking at all their computers to see who maybe had something on there that can implicate them in the case. That's what we're talking about here. They need
so
probable cause to go in and get Derek's phone, Derek's computer. That's what we're talking about. That's what the standard of the Constitution is.
But if they wanted, won't
so
they just find a way to do it? Like it just
well, if they want it, they can go apply for a search warrant.
you know.
And if they have probable cause, they get the search warrant and they can then search and rummage through your phone and see all the wonderful things you've searched for, which Google has now contained within the phone. And look, they can do wonderful things. Forensics can do wonderful things with phones. They can undelete deleted stuff, which, by the way, if you delete stuff that is incriminating, that can be incriminating, that you deleted the stuff that was incriminating. And
Mhm.
the whole thing is
That kind of came out in the Karen Reed case. I think there was a lot of that kind of if you why don't you have it, that sort of thing is if you, we know you, yeah,
Mhm.
it's
so remember, which I'm glad the Supreme Court made the decision they made, because there was a decision that came a number of years ago that dealt with cell phone passcodes
Mhm.
and how that, and the court ruled at that time that your phone is not just a phone. It's a computer. There's a heightened sense of privacy on your phone. So the password is very protected and it's very private. So to allow all this other stuff that's coming out of your phone, which you, by the way, and I agree, you don't realize you're broadcasting the stuff that you're broadcasting unless and until you start talking about, hey, I need this, and Amazon starts flashing you advertisements or whatever.
Michael's right though.
Um,
They told you they were going to take that information on page 47 of that 50-page thing you clicked
Right,
agreed.
exactly. With the
I
tiny
got,
print, right?
I gotta tell you guys though, never underestimate, like, Google search evidence is a thing now. It's a thing.
Mhm.
And you would think that at some point someone would figure out, okay, I'm not going to search for how to get rid of a body on my phone. Not
That
going to
was my
do
next
that.
question.
Or on my computer.
Well, let me give you
And
guys
yet,
another example of how this is used and how it could potentially be problematic. There's a case involving the New York Times and OpenAI where they're suing them for copyright infringement. That's just one of many things they're suing them for. And they're claiming that many of the responses that they give people who ask questions on there basically regurgitate articles word for word that were in the New York Times. So what they've asked for in discovery is 20 million different people's chats with ChatGPT so they can prove their claim that copyright was violated. So now, if you're one of the people who knows what you were chatting with ChatGPT, they're going to be able to get that information and use that in civil court to go in and get that. Now, Sam Altman, who's the chairman of the board, not the chairman of the board, the CEO of OpenAI, and I talked about this, you probably saw this, where he's asking for this AI privilege. He's liking it to when you talk to ChatGPT, it's like talking to your doctor or your lawyer, where you get a privilege that's inadmissible in court. You can't break that sort of veil when you chat with ChatGPT. So there's these questions out there on so many different levels about the privacy we have when we talk to these AI engines.
Well, it's a chat GPT in general. I know I used it for a picture of the three of us, and Michael thought he looked like Magic John. Magic Johnson.
so I
I
will,
did.
I
I
will,
sent you another picture. Get a little
I will
better.
tell you
But
the
I want to just let me
use.
say something about OBT because you were talking about how smart it is. It goes beyond that, Derek. I mean, when I was sort of just getting out on my own, I mean, it was my best friend. Listen,
100%.
I'm a 60 something year old man. I can't imagine being 15. It became my best friend. My wife starting a company, she was so elated about the way it was helping her build her company. She couldn't wait to get back in front of her computer and start chatting again with,
It's perfect every time. It's
ChatGPT.
amazing
And
technology.
it tells you how amazing you are. Oh, that's a great idea, Mike. Fantastic. The dumbest idea I've ever had. It's the greatest idea, Mike. Here's a way to think about it. So I can see where when we start talking about how it affects younger people, people who are more sort of, suggestive in their minds, they're not, 100% there, how this could be problematic.
Well, for more of my man Franz Borghardt, hit him up and follow him on Twitter at Borghardt Law, Instagram and Facebook at Franz Borghardt. And if you need a lawyer down south, head over to www.borghardtlawfirm.com for more Michael Ayala. And if you think the New York Jets are trending in the right direction, follow him on Facebook, Legal View with Michael Ayala. That'll point you to all of his brilliant stuff on YouTube, including Make It Make Sense with Marie Pereira and In Session with America's Judge, Ashley Wilcott. And go check out Michael Ayala on Substack. Michael, Franz, that was absolutely fantastic. Thanks, fellas.
I totally enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.